Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new series for Fluval here on YouTube. We are calling it Between Two Tanks. This is where a member of the Fluval team will be interviewing a respected member of the aquatic community. We'll have different guests every time. It's going to be a one-on-one mini interview for social media purposes. And the coolest part about this series is that the questions are actually going to come from you guys, our Fluval fans, via social media. Let me introduce, without further ado, our first inaugural guest here Between Two Tanks, Mr. Oliver Lucanus. Oliver, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Pretty interesting interviewing you via video here, Oliver, given the fact we live 20 minutes away from each other, but this is the world we live in now, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, Oliver, you're known by Fluval fans as our conservation ambassador, but you are definitely much more than that. So for those watching this video that may not know who you are yet, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and everything you do within the world of aquatics?
Sure. So I've been importing fish for 33 years now from all over the world and reselling them. And I'm also working at McGill University for the last few years in the geography department. So my interest there is as a research assistant. We use remote sensing, so satellite imagery, to look at the Earth. And we have started a project there called the Fish and Forest Project that specifically looks at how the human-caused changes to the surface are affecting freshwater fish. So that is a little bit luck for me. It allows me to travel a little bit more than I already do. I go, when there is no pandemic, at least 3 or 4 times a year to look at fish habitats around the world and photograph them and publish books about it. That has all come to a grinding halt at the moment, but I'm sure it'll resume soon enough.
Yeah, honestly, I guess all of our lives have been kind of flipped upside down, and that actually leads me into the first question we got from our fans. We posted recently on social media about this upcoming interview with you, and here are some of the questions that came. The first one being, how has COVID affected your livestock business, and also your role as you're a world traveler. You lecture at a lot of aquatic events. You research all over the place. So how has that affected you now that you're home, and we're living quarantined at home?
Yeah, it's definitely strange because, for one, I thought that this pandemic would negatively affect the fish sales themselves. But once the logistics got worked out, I think a lot of people are stuck in their houses. So building wood is selling out, and bird seed is selling out. And I think it's the same thing. It's one of the few things people can still do is enjoy the fish at home. So as far as that goes, if we can get the fish, I think we're actually selling more fish. For me personally, it's strange. I think this is more or less the longest time I have not traveled since I'm 16 years old or so. So that has been the odd thing, is to just work every month and not go. In March was my last trip. I was actually in Suriname and got stuck there during the pandemic.
That was actually my question I had for you. You told me a pretty interesting story about you getting out of Suriname. So why don't you kind of tell our viewers about that?
Yeah, so we were in an Amerindian village in the south of Suriname, a place that you can only reach by aircraft. And we pulled out the satellite phone for a call, and they said, well, you better get your way back because things are starting to shut down. And by the time we got back to the capital, Paramaribo, the country had shut down. So the president actually decided that it would be the safest thing for the country to shut all the borders. And we spent 4 or 5 days in a rented apartment, not quite knowing what was going to happen. They finally announced an emergency relief flight to get some of the foreigners out of the country, because Suriname has only 6 ICU beds for the entire nation. So they wanted to get rid of as many foreigners as possible, and we got our way through to Miami, and I ended up on a flight to Toronto at the last minute. with a bunch of people coming off cruise ships. So probably the worst day of the pandemic,
Right.
with a bunch of people that came off the worst possible situation. But I guess I got lucky to get home without having any ill effects.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're happy you made it home safely. Um, Leading into the next question here, again, these are pretty random questions, which we kind of like. So this is what our fans wanted to know. A lot of them are interested in starting a biotope aquarium. This is not something new to the hobby. Obviously, we've known about it for a while, but it obviously having natural aquariums and biotope aquariums is becoming a little bit of a more of a buzzword more and more these days. So for those watching that may not know what a biotope aquarium is, can you explain that in your words? And what are some of the advantages of having a biotope aquarium?
Yeah, I think we tried this early on with Fluval some 10 years ago, I think, or more, to try and get people to make an aquarium that is instead of the traditional community tank where you have fish from every continent that you like, with the limited number of plants that are available. Instead, to look at how do these fish live in nature and what does the community look like. So the aquarium that's behind me is from the Rio Xingu in Brazil. Everything that you see here, you could see by dipping your head underwater there. The Biotope Aquarium is more or less to capture a moment in time that would exactly look like that in a river. So if we translate that into our local river, you would see maybe some smallmouth bass and some darters at the bottom, and some crayfish and some common plants, reed plants or something like that. The challenge in doing this is to put together a community that actually works, because fish are predatory, so it takes a little bit of time to figure out which fish from a given habitat would work. So what is notably absent here is pike cichlids, for example, or piranhas that would also be in this habitat.
Right.
But they're not in my biotope because that won't work for very long.
Right. Well, that's pretty cool. I think we have a question here specifically. This is a very specific question. We have one fan that was interested in Corey's. And he writes, what size tank would you recommend as a minimum for Corydoras, and how many would you keep in that tank?
So I think that Corydoras is such a diverse group. And some Corydoras live in very large schools and other ones live in small troops. So if I take one of the more common ones, let's take Corydoras sturbi, the orange fin cory, because it's a widely available common species from the Mato Grosso in Brazil. They are normally living in small groups of 6 to 12 animals, and I would give them at least 30 gallons or so for a small group. Now, there are some Corydoras species that are much smaller, like Pygmaeus, that you can keep in larger groups, and there are some that get much bigger. So I think the idea is to choose a species that is, fitting the size of aquarium that you have available.
For sure. A fun question to end on, because we're going to try and keep these interviews short. And we actually had a lot of questions for you, Oliver, so we'll probably cut at least another video on this afterwards. But to end things on a light note, can fish smell?
I think that's a really good question, because fish smell probably better than most other animals, including us. I mean, we know that sharks can, smell blood in the water from kilometers away, but the same thing goes for our fish. And I think that the catfish obviously smell much better than other fish, but fish in general will smell to the point that they will smell even outside the aquarium. The larger the narrels on the catfish, the little shields that go over the nostrils on the front of the fish, usually the better they are at it. Something to look at, for example, is cetopsis, these catfish that enter the gills and wounds of injured fish. The canero is the local name. I think that those fish are probably the best smelling fish in the Amazon, because if something dies or is injured, for example, if you foul hook a fish in the Amazon, by the time you've reeled that fish in, some of these catfish can be inside the wound. So they will enter they will smell the blood and enter that fish within minutes of it getting injured.
Pretty cool. So Oliver, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're gonna keep these interviews very short. Thanks for answering those questions. It's obviously we appreciate your knowledge base and all of your experience to draw upon. It's pretty amazing stuff. So we definitely will come back with a second video with more questions from Oliver. Before we do that, guys, if you haven't yet subscribed to the Fluval channel, make sure you do that. Make sure you like this video. And hit the bell icon to be notified when we do upload new content. If you have any questions you want us to ask Oliver in part 2, please leave them in the comments below. Please be sure to follow us as well on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, because we'll also be posting about future guests, and that's where you'll be able to ask us the questions that you want us to ask of these guests. So Oliver, thanks again. Glad you're safe. Keep being safe. We'll talk to you again really soon, and thanks everyone for watching.
Sounds good. Talk to you later.
Bye.